Hi, I'm Lee Maxey with MindMax, and I'm really grateful to be here at the Solar Conference with Caleb Simmons, who is the Executive Director of Online Education at the University of Arizona. And I'm glad to be talking to him about a variety of topics. And so I'll start with, what does an Executive Director of Online Education do?
Great question. To put it very simply, I oversee the operations and the academic programs of Arizona Online.
Great. Well, those programs have had a lot of changes in the last while. You've made a big acquisition. You've tried to collaborate. Where I live, SUNY Plattsburgh is combining with a community college and trying to make both survive. You guys are doing that at a massive scale. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Obviously, after the acquisition of what's now our global campus, there have been a few hiccups, and we've been trying to figure out what that looks like. But back in December of 2023, our president decided to make some pretty large leadership changes and bring our global campus under the office of the provost, appoint a new senior vice provost, and that's really changed the tenor of how we're trying to do this. And I think I honestly changed some of the goals of what we're trying to accomplish, perhaps less of a revenue play and more of a thinking about access and student success and how we really keep students at the forefront. And I think it's given us a North Star to be able to work toward. And we've made a lot of progress just from December till now, thinking about what in-state might look like.
I love the North Star. I use that term a lot, and I think it's really important if everyone knows where they're heading. You and I talked a while back about the added infrastructure, and we think in terms of people, process, technology, and culture. And whenever there's a merger, those four, I mean, those are really all four eventually need to be aligned for it to work. So, how is that leveraging going? How's that all going?
Part of it is still a negotiation, but what became clear to me from day one is I come from the traditional brick and mortar side. I was faculty in the classroom at University of Arizona, and as I slowly transitioned to online education, it took a while for me to stop thinking in terms of 18 to 22-year-olds in class, residential. Like that was still my default. And I think I am kind of a microcosm of the larger institution. The institution is trying to think about online education, online learners, but so rooted in the traditional forms that even as it tries, its reference points are always rooted in that traditional residential experience. And with the acquisition and integration of UAGC, our global campus, I think this is where they bring something that's very additive, and they're kind of built from the ground up to be online. So they think online learner first. Their systems are built for online learners. They're built for post-traditional adult working, right. And it's radical how that portion of their culture has really sort of helped me understand the landscape I'm working in more. But then also their systems are able to be a little more nimble, a little more flexible, to be able to work with those students and provide support where they need it, as opposed to sometimes using traditional systems. It's like a shoehorn effect. We know kind of what we need to do, and we're trying to make it fit into what we already have. And so I think right now we're in the conversation of how do we make those choices about which systems to use, how to integrate into the main campus residential system model. And that's taking a little bit because it requires a lot of different expertise and a lot of people at the table. But ultimately, I think the marriage of the two institutions is going to make us better suited in the future, where we can both serve residential students and online students, and then everything in between of that spectrum, because that's multimodal approach is really the future of where all of this is heading.
Right. They don't need a gym membership, but they do need a tutor at 10 o'clock at night. Right.
Now, well, and also when you think globally, they need it 24/7, right?
Well, that's where I was going to ask my next question, which is North Star. Is North Star Arizona? Is North Star Southwest? Is North Star global dominance?
Dominance, I'll stay away from that. But as far as what I think about a lot, given my background and my situatedness and my relationship to the institution and the state, I look at the people within Arizona that are not being served currently. And if you look at the state, we've got a lot of major players in online.
Yep.
And so there's can be some competitiveness. But actually, when you look at the data about some credit, no degree, or any of the other ways of framing that, there's still a lot of people underserved. So I think that is our initial target of how do we serve those people within our state as a land grant state institution, get them to be able to achieve their educational goals. And then after that, then we can start to leverage some of our brand. You know, it used to be the Pac-12 footprint. We're moving into the Big 12, so our footprint's kind of changing. I think it's going to be exciting. But also, we have a very global footprint with our micro campuses, with our research. And so I think there is something that can be added into the global market that we bring and serve a variety of folks. Like when you look at some of our programs, whether it's about water resources, like this is a global problem. We need to be thinking about education on a global level, not a micro level. So I think that we're there to serve our state, serve our the citizens of Arizona, but by building out infrastructure to serve them, we can actually think much global and have bigger impacts.
On that, in terms of the serving a more global population, one of the trends I'm seeing in higher ed now is mega universities, bigger institutions, fewer bigger institutions with very large footprints / very large student bodies that they're serving, and where the smaller institutions fit within that is going to be interesting, and be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, since I already brought up athletic conferences, I think there's a corollary there in the conferences moving to perhaps a few megas. But I think that and the megas will be important because the need is large. And when you start talking about scalability, you can really hit scale, then it starts making sense for everyone, and you really have to just focus on quality. But I always think that when we start looking at the differentiators between different universities, there are different things different institutions have to offer. Let's zoom into our state, look at our three institutions. ASU does something, NAU does something else, University of Arizona does something else. And so we excel in those things. So really thinking about collaboration between institutions. Like we shouldn't always be wanting to absorb everyone, but like what do we bring that is additive to that student experience? What is our area of excellence? And then how do we give access to that excellence? That's how we are starting to frame our approaches, excellence and access to excellence. But then there's always going to be those pockets that aren't going to be touched by these megas. In fact, I was just talking to someone from a small college in Minnesota earlier, and they provide religious education. Like that's a very different thing than what we do. Something that is needed for a certain segment of the population. So like they can fill that void. So how do we think about, even if there's a place where there's 4 or 5 megas, like there's circles, right? And there's diamonds between those circles where people can fit in, and thinking about the population and how to serve them.
As a very large state institution, the trend that's going on with flagships doing well right now, and a lot of the regional publics having a lot of troubles. You mentioned the 3 institutions that are all very big institutions. I know California's talking about revisiting their master plan. Any thoughts on where Arizona is headed in relationship to concepts like that?
Yeah, I think we have some sorting out to do, and just speaking very candidly, like I am hoping we're moving to a place of greater collaboration between the 3 institutions. Someone from Arizona Online recently accepted the position of vice provost of NAU Online, Carmen Chan. So I think that's a good step that we can have that familiarity between institutions and start to really think about how can we grow collectively, because we all report to the same people, to the Board of Regents, right? So competitiveness is going to serve us in some extent, but really is that going to achieve the goals of our boss's boss, and then the governor, right? So like what's the goal where we're wanting to head? And I hope, for the sake of the mission, that we're able to get to a place of collaboration and really think about how do we move online education forward holistically. And I think we're making progress.
You guys have, I think, a lot of capability now. Where are things at with your thought? I mean, we're in Minnesota right now. Minnesota just passed a law, I think it's a law, saying as of July 1, state institutions aren't allowed to use OPMs going forward. What are your thoughts on where we've gotten to and where we're at now?
Yeah, OPMs are such an interesting part of an online administrator strategy, because we've recently decided to move away from most of our OPM contracts because we were to the point where that revenue share didn't make sense for us.
Mm-hmm.
But when we first launched in 2015, without the help of OPMs, we wouldn't have been able to build up in the way that we did. So OPM certainly can be additive to your overall strategy, but that's part of it, is to think strategically about what should be your relationship with an online program manager, what that looks like, what the end state is. Is it a temporary relationship? Is it long term? And build that into the overall strategic plan, because if you do it out of just ease and convenience without a lot of thought for the future, you're going to wind up in a situation where it doesn't work for anybody.
Right. I have been saying this since the pandemic started because I'm familiar with the concept of unlearning so that you can learn new things. Everybody experienced the need to do distance learning of some kind during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And the plus side of that is everyone got exposure to some kind of online education. As you know, not all is equal. It's a garbage basket term. But I know from, we're in marketing, we do a lot with marketing, and we know that when we reach out to people, that their view of what online education might be could be extremely varied. Can you talk about some of the things that you're doing to explain, how you're presenting the value or the instructional design behind, and whether that's resonating with people or not, or whether they've just, said online's not for me?
Yeah, I mean, there's several different audiences you have to tell this story to, because I think a lot of students have some natural feedback from that COVID experience if they were in K-12 during that period, or if they were in university or college at that time, because a hastily thrown together online course does a lot more damage than good. So I think a lot of people had an experience of a need-based, hasty online experience. So they wound up with something that they don't want to replicate, but they also at the same time, many people see the flexibility as being the greatest benefit. And I would agree with that. So our job as online administrators is, when we're talking to faculty, students, legislature, regents, whatever, is to talk about that difference and what it means to have a well-designed instructional plan, well-designed content, well-designed platforms to be able to make that experience additive. And I use myself as an example because I'm a faculty member coming from religious studies. My focus is in Hinduism, and often have to talk about Sanskrit terminology and whatnot. So when I'm in a class, a gen ed class is typically what I would teach. Throwing around Sanskrit terminology, you can just see my students' heads spinning. But a well-designed asynchronous course, now I've got subtitles. Mm-hmm. You can pause. You can put in play, pause it to be able to have quizzes to make sure that they understood that concept in the middle. So a well-designed course can actually be additive to the learner's experience, where they can have an enhanced experience as opposed to one that is lesser than the in-person. And then don't even talk about accessibility issues, because the accessibility of the in-person experience is just flawed. And online can help overcome many of those struggles. And when we talk about access, then we're talking about a lot of different kinds of access, because literally it becomes more accessible and more inclusive of the learner, that it can thrive.
You're describing me fixing a lawnmower and going back to the YouTube click and clip and watching it like 3 times and just going back 15 seconds to see where I'm not particularly mechanical. So,
no, it's exactly
it
that.
works, that works. Higher ed's under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. We've got everything from the FAFSA disaster to protests on campus to politicizing higher ed in general to the demographic cliff, which we've been talking about for years because we've known about it for years, to confusion about whether online, where do you see things going for higher ed in the sense of how can it lead its way out of this?
I think part of it is identifying the root problem. 'Cause I think a lot of things you described get us back to a tension that's been brewing for a while, but I think it's come to the fore, and that is with the increased tuitions, the increased cost of higher education, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I think as tuitions grew, this became just a real question that we were failing to address because we saw our inherent value. And we lost the skill to be able to articulate the values of higher education. And honestly, I think we took a wrong turn as a movement or whatever we want to call it, and that is we based everything in workforce. And I think that's a very important aspect of what we do. But higher education is a lot more than that as well. It's thinking about being good citizens. It's learning to understand how to evaluate information, to be able to have informed conversations, to be able to dialogue, things that aren't necessarily captured just in the paycheck. I mean, the paycheck is necessary, and we need to have, meet labor needs, but we also need to show our value to society in a way that, it used to be just recognized higher ed does this for an individual, and we got away from that. And so I think the impetus is on us now to show our value, to our students, show our value to stakeholders in government, show our value to population in general. And then as we make a conscious effort to do that, I think that some of these other symptoms may start to go away if we can get people to recognize that higher education is additive to society overall, additive to workforce, additive to how you experience life, the human experience. Because I firmly, as a humanist, believe this, right? And so I think that we need to do a better job of that.
Yeah, I cringe when I hear college or higher ed being talked about as one thing, and I really think we not the congressional hearing precision of language, but I think precision of language I think is really important, and different schools can do different things, and workforce readiness, direct to work, those are things that are important. You talked about religious studies and a faith-based education, which a Jesuit education, for instance, is very focused on social justice and so forth, and a public institution or a land grant has another purpose, and then research institutions have a whole nother purpose, and when we try and conflate them as one thing, I just don't think it's a meaningful conversation.
And that's one of the scary things about the scenario where there's just a few megas is you have different institutions trying to do it all, and there's that saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none." It's been around for a while because it's true, right? And so sometimes we need to focus on that area of excellence and make sure that one thing that we do, or two or three things that we do very well, as opposed to trying to step into everyone else's lane all the time.
Anything else top of mind for you that's going on right now that you think is important to discuss?
Yeah, no, I mean, the rapid pace of federal regulations about online education, it's kind of breakneck right now that you never know, and some tons of regulations coming up for comment, constantly keeping online administrators and administrators in general in higher ed on their toes. And so, even next week, I'm going to a workshop on attendance taking. because this could
Yep.
radically change the way that we offer online education at the University of Arizona. And in my opinion, it could break the flexibility of asynchronous
And increase the cost
and increase the cost
significantly,
Yeah.
because I just came from a session where we were talking about policy, and the attendance taking was one of the discussion points. And as someone who came from the corporate learning world, competencies, outcomes, that's what's important in my mind. How you get there, the attendance taking, keystroke analysis. I mean, we're getting down into weeds that a governing agency isn't going to be able to manage that anyway.
But it gets us all back to that loss of faith,
Mhm.
right? When
Right.
population loses faith, their representatives, their legislators need to try to address it. And so you have people who aren't
Mhm.
as well informed.
Yep.
They have advisors and things, but